A candle flickered on the table, and Dalinar burned the end of his napkin in it, sending a small braid of pungent smoke into the air. Stupid decorative candles. What was the point? Looking pretty? Didn't they use spheres because they were better than candles in the first place? At a glare from Gavilar, Dalinar stopped burning his napkin and leaned back, nursing a mug of deep violet wine, the kind you could smell from across the room, potent and flavorful. A feast hall spread before him, dozens of tables set on the floor of the large stone room. The place was far too warm, and sweat prickled on Dalinar's arms and forehead. Too many candles, maybe. Outside the feast hall, a storm raged, like a madman locked away, impotent and ignored. "But how do you deal with the high storms, Bright Lord?" Toh asked Gavilar. The tall, golden-haired Westerner sat with them at the high table. "Well, good planning keeps an army from needing to be out during a storm, except in rare situations," Gavilar explained. "Holdings in Alethkar are frequent. If a campaign takes longer than anticipated, we can split the army and retreat back to a number of these towns for shelter." "And if you're in the middle of a siege?" Toh asked. "Sieges?" Gavilar laughed. "These are the Stormlands, Bright Lord Toh. What is there to besiege?" "Surely there are cities with fortifications," Toh said. "Your famed Kholinar has majestic walls, does it not?" The Westerner had a thick accent and kept drawing out his O and ah sounds. Seemed silly to Dalinar. "You're forgetting about soulcasters," Gavilar said. "Long sieges are pointless. You can't starve out an army, at least not its soldiers, while there are soulcasters and emeralds to make food. Important cities in Alethkar have stores against this sort of thing. No, here we either break down the walls quickly, or we just seize the high ground above the city and win the battle that way." Toh nodded, seeming fascinated. "Soulcasters," he said. "We have not these things in Rera or Iri. Fascinating, fascinating. And so many shards here. Perhaps half the world's wealth of blades and plates, all contained in Vorin nations. One wonders if the heralds themselves favor you." Dalinar took a long pull on his wine. Outside, the thunder shook their bunker. The high storm was in full force now. Inside, however, servants brought out slabs of pork and lanka claws for the men, cooked in a savory broth. The women dined elsewhere, including, supposedly, Toh's sister. Dalinar hadn't met her yet. The Western Light Eyes had arrived barely an hour before the storm hit. The hall was soon clogged with the sounds of people eating and chatting. Dalinar tore into his lanka claws, cracking them with the bottom of his mug and biting out the meat. This feast seemed too polite. Where was the music, the laughter, the women? Eating in separate rooms? Life had been different these last few years of conquest. More and more of Gavilar's time was required by the administration of his kingdom, which was half as big as they wanted it to be, but still demanding. Politics. Gavilar and Sadeas didn't make Dalinar play at it too often, but he still had to sit at feasts like this rather than dining with his men. He sucked on a claw, watching Gavilar talk to the foreigner. Storms. Gavilar actually looked regal with his beard combed like that, glowing gemstones on his fingers. He wore a uniform of the newer style, formal, rigid. Dalinar instead wore his skirt like Takama and an open overshirt that exposed his chest. Sadeas held court with a group of lesser Light Eyes at a table across the hall. Every one of that group had been carefully chosen as men with uncertain loyalties. Sadeas would talk, persuade, convince, and listen for signs of rebellion. Dalinar finished the claws, then turned toward his pork, a succulent slab of meat swimming in gravy. The food was better at this feast. He just wished he didn't feel so useless here. Gavilar made alliances. Sadeas dealt with problems. Those two could treat a feast hall like a battlefield. Dalinar shook his head, reaching to his side for his knife so he could cut his pork. Only the knife wasn't there. Damnation. He'd loaned it to Teleb, hadn't he? He stared down at the pork, smelling its peppery sauce, and found his mouth watering. He reached to eat with his fingers, then thought to look up. Everyone else was eating primly, with utensils, but the servers had forgotten to bring him a knife. Damnation again. He sat back, wagging his mug for more wine. Nearby, Gavilar and that foreigner continued their chat. "Your campaign here has been impressive, Bright Lord Kholin," Toh said. One sees a glint of your ancestor in you, the great sun maker himself. Hopefully, Gavilar noted, my accomplishments won't be as ephemeral as his. Ephemeral? He reforged Alethkar, Bright Lord. Yet his empire didn't even last a single generation past his death. What kind of legacy is that? The storm rumbled. Dalinar tried to catch a servant to request a dinner knife, but they were too busy scuttling about, seeing to the needs of demanding feastgoers. He sighed, then stood, stretching, and walked to the door. Still holding his empty mug. Lost in thought, he threw aside the bar on the door, then shoved open the large wooden construction and stepped outside. A sheet of icy rain washed over his skin, and wind blasted him, strong enough that he stumbled. The ice storm was at its height, lightning smashing down like the vengeful attacks from the heralds themselves. Dalinar struck out into the storm, his overshirt whipping around him. Gavilar talked more and more about things like legacy, the kingdom, responsibility. What had happened to the fun of the fight, of riding into battle laughing? Thunder crashed, and the periodic slices of lightning were barely enough to see by. Still, Dalinar knew his way around well enough. This was a high storm way stop, a place built to house patrolling armies during storms. Gavilar and he had been positioned at this one for a good 4 months now, drawing tribute from nearby farms and menacing House Evancaw from just inside its borders. Dalinar selected one bunker in particular and pounded on the door. No response. So he summoned his shard blade, slid the tip through the crack, and sliced the bar inside. He pushed open the door to find a group of armed men with wide, terrified eyes standing in a line, weapons held in nervous grips. "Tell her," Dalinar said, standing in the doorway. "Did I loan you my belt knife?" "My favorite one, with the white spine ivory on the grip." The tall soldier, who stood in the second rank of terrified men, gaped at him. "Your knife, Bright Lord?" "I lost the storming thing somewhere," Dalinar said. "I loaned it to you, didn't I?" "I gave it back, sir," Teleb said. "You used it to pry that splinter out of your saddle, remember?" "Damnation, you're right. What did I do with that blasted thing?" Dalinar shook his head, leaving the doorway and striding back out into the storm. Perhaps the reason that he was so worried about Gavilar had more to do with himself than it did his brother. 4 years at war, they'd already secured half the kingdom. Their progress was remarkable, yet these last months had been more about what happened off the battlefield than on it. Even their battles were so calculated these days. It all seemed to be leaving Dalinar behind, like the discarded shell of a Kremling after its molting. An explosive burst of wind drove him against the wall, and he stumbled, then stepped backward, driven by instincts he couldn't define. A large boulder slammed into the wall, then bounced free. Dalinar glanced and saw something glowing in the distance, a gargantuan figure that moved on spindly, luminous legs. Dalinar stepped back up to the door to the feast hall, gave the whatever it was a rude gesture, then pushed open the door, throwing down 2 servants who had been holding it closed. He strode back in, streaming with water, and hiked up to the high table where he flopped down, still holding his mug. Wonderful. Now he was wet, and he still couldn't eat his pork. Everyone had gone silent. A sea of eyes stared at him. "Brother?" Gavilar asked, the only sound in the room. "Is everything all right?" "Lost my storming knife," Dalinar said. "Thought I'd left it in the other bunker." He raised his mug and took a loud, lazy slurp of rainwater. "Excuse me, Lord Gavilar," Poe stammered. I find myself in need of refreshment." The golden-haired westerner stood from his place, bowed, and retreated. His face seemed even paler than those folk normally were. "What's wrong with him?" Dalinar asked, scooting his chair closer to his brother. "I assume," Gavilar said, sounding amused, "that people he knows don't casually go for strolls in high storms." "Bah," Dalinar said. "This is a fortified war camp, with walls and bunkers. We needn't be scared of a little wind." "Toh thinks differently, I assure you." "Why are you grinning?" "Well, brother, you may have just proven in one moment a point I've spent a half hour trying to make politically. Toh wonders if we're strong enough to protect him." Is that what the conversation was about?" "Obliquely, yes." "Glad I could help," Dalinar said, sucking on the claw. "What does it take to get one of those fancy servants to get me a storming knife?" They're master servants, Dalinar, his brother said, making a sign by raising his hand in a particular way. The sign of need, remember? No. You really need to pay better attention, Gavilar said. We aren't living in huts anymore. They'd never lived in huts. They were Kholin. He didn't like that Gavilar was buying into the story that the rest of the kingdom told, that the one that claimed his branch of the family had, until recently, been ruffians from the backwaters of their own princedom. A gaggle of servants in black and white flocked to Gavilar, and he requested a new dining knife for Dalinar. As they split to run the errand, the doors to the women's feast hall opened, and a figure slipped in. Dalinar's breath caught. Navani's hair glowed with the tiny rubies she'd woven into it, a color matched by her pendant and bracelet. Her face a sultry tan, her hair jet Alethi black, her red lips smile so knowing and clever, and a figure to make a man weep for desire. His brother's wife. Dalinar steeled himself and raised his arm in a gesture kind of like the one Gavilar had made. A serving man stepped up with a springy gait. "Bright Lord," he said, "I see to your desire, of course, though you may wish to know that the sign is off. If you'll allow me to demonstrate." Dalinar made a rude gesture. "Is this one better?" Wine, Dalinar said, wagging his mug. "Violet. Enough to fill this 3 times at least." "And what vintage would you like, Bright Lord?" He eyed Navani. "Whichever one is closest." Navani slipped between tables, followed by the squatter form of Iole Sadius. Neither seemed to care that they were the only light-eyed women in the room. "What happened to the emissary?" Navani said as she arrived, sliding between Dalinar and Gavilar as a servant brought her a chair. "Dalinar scared him off," Gavilar said. The scent of her perfume was heady. Dalinar scooted his chair to the side and set his face. Firm. Don't let her know how she made him feel warm, made him live like nothing else but the battle. Iole pulled a chair over for herself, and a servant finally brought Dalinar's wine. He took a long, calming drink straight from the jug. "We've been digging at the sister," Iole said, leaning in from Gavilar's other side. "She's a touch vapid." "A touch?" Navani asked. "But I'm reasonably sure she's being honest." "The brother seems the same," Gavilar said, rubbing his chin and inspecting Toe, who had crossed the room toward the bar, where a servant was bringing him drinks. "Innocent, wide-eyed. I think he's honest." "He's a sycophant," Dalinar said with a grunt. "He's a man without a home, Dalinar," Iole said. "No loyalty, at the mercy of those who take him in, and he has only one piece he can play to secure his future. Shard plates. Taken from his homeland of Rira and brought east as far as he could go from his kinsmen, who were reportedly outraged to find such a precious heirloom stolen." "He doesn't have the armor with him," Gavilar said. "He's at least smart enough not to carry it. He'll want assurances before giving it to us. Powerful assurances." "Look how he stares at Dalinar," Navani said. "You impressed him." She cocked her head. "Are you wet?" Dalinar ran his hand through his hair. Storms. He hadn't been embarrassed for a moment to look at the crowd in the room, but before her, he found himself blushing. Gavilar laughed. He went for a stroll. "You're kidding," Iole said, scooting over as Sadius tromped up to the high table. The bulbous-faced man settled down on the chair next to her, the two of them sitting half on, half off. He dropped a plate on the table, piled with claws and a deep red sauce. Iole attacked them immediately. She was one of the few women Dalinar knew who liked masculine food. "What are we discussing?" Sadius asked, waving away a master servant with a chair, and then draping his arm around his wife's shoulders. "We are talking about getting Dalinar married," Iole said. "What?" Dalinar almost choked on a mouthful of wine. "That is the point of this, isn't it?" Iole said. "Toe and his sister, they'll want more than just asylum. They'll want to be part of things, inject their blood into the royal line, so to speak." Dalinar took another long drink. "You could try water sometime, Dalinar," Sadius said. "I had some rainwater earlier. Everyone stared at me funny." Navani smiled at him. There didn't seem to be enough wine in the world to prepare him for that gaze behind the smile, so piercing, so measuring. "This could be what we need," Gavilar said. "It gives us the appearance of speaking for Alethkar. If people outside the kingdom start coming to me for refuge and treaties, we might be able to sway the remaining high princes. We might be able to unite this country, not through further war, but through sheer weight of legitimacy. A servant at long last dropped by with a knife. Dalinar took it eagerly, then frowned as the woman walked away. "What?" Navani asked. "This little thing?" Dalinar asked, pinching the dainty knife between two fingers and dangling it. "How am I supposed to eat a pork steak with this?" "You attack it," Iole said, making a stabbing motion. "Pretend it's some thick-necked guy who has been insulting your biceps." "If someone insulted my biceps, I wouldn't attack them," Dalinar said. "I'd refer them to a physician because obviously something is wrong with their vision." Navani laughed, a musical sound. "Oh, Dalinar," Sadia said, "I don't know if there's another person on Roshar who could have said that with a straight face." Dalinar grunted, then tried to maneuver the little knife into cutting his steak. The meat was growing cold, but still smelled delicious. "What defeated Sunmaker?" Gavilar suddenly asked. Eli said. "Sunmaker," Gavilar replied, looking from Navani to Sadius to Dalinar. "He united Alethkar. Why did he fail to create a lasting empire?" "His kids were too greedy," Dalinar said, sawing at the steak. "Or too weak, maybe." "No, that's not it," Navani said. "They might have united if the Sunmaker himself could have bothered to settle on an heir. It's his fault." "He was off in the west," Gavilar said, leading his army to further glory. Alethkar and Herdaz weren't enough for him. He wanted the whole world. "So it was his ambition," Sadius said. "No, his greed," Gavilar said quietly. "What's the point of conquering if you're not going to ever just sit back and enjoy it? If you're never going to be satisfied? Shubrath's son, Mashanalan, Sunmaker, even the hierarchy, they all stretched further and further until they collapsed. In all the history of mankind, has any conqueror decided they'd had enough? Has any man just said, this is good, this is what I wanted, then gone home?" "Right now," Dalinar said, "what I want is to eat my storming steak." He held up the little knife, which was bent at the middle. Navani blinked. "How in the Almighty's 10th name did you do that?" "I don't know." Gavilar stared with that distant, far-off look in his eyes, the look that was getting more and more common. "Why are we at war, brother?" "This again?" Dalinar said. "Look, it's not so complicated. Can't you remember how it was back when we started?" "Remind me." "Well," Dalinar said, wagging his bent knife, "we looked at this place here, this kingdom, and we realized, hey, all these people have stuff. And we figured, hey, maybe we should have that stuff. So we took it." "Oh, Dalinar," Sadius said, chuckling, "you are a gem." "Don't you ever think about what it meant, though?" Gavilar asked. "A kingdom? Something grander than yourself?" "That's foolishness, Gavilar. When people fight, it's about their stuff. That's it." "Maybe," Gavilar said, "maybe. There's something I want you to listen to. The codes of war from the old days, back when Alethkar meant something." Dalinar nodded absently as the serving staff entered with teas and fruit to close the meal. One tried to take away his steak, and he growled at her. As she backed off, Dalinar caught sight of something. A woman, peeking into the room from the other feast hall. She wore a delicate, filmy dress of a pale yellow, matched by her blonde hair. He leaned forward, curious. She was 18, maybe 19. She was tall, almost as tall as an Alethi, and small of chest. In fact, there was a certain sense of flimsiness to her, as if she were somehow less real than an Alethi. Same went for her brother, with his slender build. But that hair, it made her stand out, like a candle's glow in a dark room. She scampered across the feast hall to her brother, who handed her a drink. She tried to take it with her left hand, which was tied inside a small pouch of yellow cloth. The dress didn't have sleeves, strangely. "She kept trying to dine with her safe hand," Navani said, eyebrow cocked. Iole leaned down the table toward Dalinar, speaking conspiratorially. "They go around half-clothed out in the far west, Rirans, Iriali, the Reshi. They aren't as inhibited as these prim Alethi women. I bet she's quite exotic in the bedroom." Dalinar grunted. Then he finally spotted a knife, in the hand hidden behind the back of a server clearing Gavilar's plates. Dalinar kicked at his brother's chair, breaking the leg off and sending Gavilar toppling to the ground. The assassin swung at the same moment, clipping Gavilar's ear but otherwise missing. The wild swing hit the table, driving the knife into the wood. Dalinar leapt to his feet, Reaching over Gavilar and grabbing the assassin by the neck, he spun the would-be killer around and slammed him down on the ground with a satisfying crunch. Still in motion, Dalinar grabbed backward and grabbed the knife from the table and then slammed it into the assassin's chest. Puffing, Dalinar stepped back and wiped the rainwater from his eyes. Gavilar sprang to his feet, shard blade appearing in his hand. He looked down at the assassin, then over at Dalinar. Dalinar kicked at the assassin to be sure he was dead. Then he nodded to himself, righted his chair, and sat down. Then he leaned over and yanked the man's knife from his chest. Good blade! He washed it off in his wine, then cut off a piece of his steak and shoved it in his mouth. Finally, he thought. Good pork, he said around the bite. Across the room, Tow and his sister were staring at Dalinar with looks that mixed awe and horror. Gavilar settled back down, waving away the guards who belatedly had rushed to help. Navani clutched his arm, obviously shaken by the attack. Again, everyone in the feast hall was gawking at the high table. Dalinar cut his steak again, shoving another piece in his mouth. What? He wasn't going to drink the wine he'd washed the blood into. He wasn't a barbarian. I know I said I wanted you to be free to make your own choice in regard to a bride, Gavilar said, leaning in. But I'll do it, Dalinar said, eyes forward. Navani was lost to him. He just needed to storming accept that. Those two are timid and careful, Navani noted. It might take more time to persuade them. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, Gavilar said, looking back at the corpse. Dalinar is nothing if not persuasive.